Hey guys, Big Square, Roota.com. This is a session analyzing the remote viewing of Satoshi Nakamoto done by Dick Allgaier and his team, the crypto viewing team. Um, I believe I can identify some of the people that they talk about. They don't identify names, but it is clear from all the viewers that it is a group of people. And the most interesting thing to me is that this group of people collaborated over time, a lot of time, as in decades, not the couple years that everybody thought, oh yeah, Satoshi put this together in a couple years. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the session, and then I'm going to stop it and talk about who I think these people are. Mostly, I'll get into that when Dick has his discussion of what his viewing said, because he's more on top of it. I think Dick has a lot more kind of psychic abilities than the other guys. But the other guys do good work as well. So let's check it out.
All right. Hi, I'm Dick Allgaier, and I'm recording a video conference meeting here with Dath Smith in the UK. I'm in Hawaii. And our target for this presentation was Satoshi Nakamoto. Who was Satoshi Nakamoto? Daz, tell us the story of how we got this target and who supposedly is Satoshi Nakamoto.
Hi, Dick. Good to see you again. Well, Satoshi is allegedly the creator of Bitcoin. He created the technology and he put out a famous white paper on it. And it's essentially the core that all other blockchain technologies are kind of come from, they stem from. He's anonymous, or they're anonymous. There have been a few people over the years that have claimed to be Satoshi, but I don't think those claims have actually come to any validity or anything real out of those. And essentially, it's almost like he's his own myth at the moment, especially within people interested in cryptocurrencies like us. And we were given this target by the people that are working with us on crypto viewing channel, and yeah, we independently both did.
I would like to say that I was involved in giving it. It was one of my suggestions for a target. So there is a possibility and a potential, and Cliff Hyde believes it's more than a potential, that information given by the original person who thought up the idea leaks into the results of RVing. Now, Dick has said he's done all these experiments. No, that's not true. Cliff disputes him on this. I don't know. I mean, to me, it fit into a narrative, but it didn't fit into my narrative exactly. It expanded it. It said, "Oh my God, this can happen also, and this is what was needed." So, just keep that in mind.
Remote viewing sessions on it.
Yeah, we're going to present three because Rock Archie also did this. So we'll make it very clear that we did this work independently. We did not compare notes. We all did this in isolation. So we'll start with your session, Daz. Can you share your screen and show us what you got?
Well, first of all, when he says that, they absolutely are independent. They only work off a number. It could be anything from a piece of fruit to a nuclear bomb. They have no idea what the actual thing is that they're targeting.
You looked at Satoshi.
Yep, bear with me while I turn the share screen on here a second. I went straight into ideograms here, and I had lots of fast energy and emotion, lots of speed, there was lots of noise, commotion, lots of data which was moving, lots of speed and in chunks. I did another ideogram on page 2 here. I had lots of movement, fast penetrating energy, lots of technology, light and energy. It felt like the energy was moving like a snake, wriggling, almost pulsating like it was alive. And this felt a little bit like music. It felt like the data had a rhythm and a pattern to its movement. It felt like it could be musical if interpreted correctly. I felt that this was a living, evolving, self-learning, intelligent kind of technology. And I think this is me describing the blockchain technology here behind Satoshi. Again, move on again. I still talk about this rhythm. It feels like this data has a rhythm and a pattern to it, which repeats, and it's very energetic and very snake-like or electrical pulses. It feels almost conscious, and I felt like this feels like an evolution as well. And I also sensed that there was an underlying hidden element to this energy and motion of data that I was looking at. It definitely felt like it was a live code. It almost feels like what you would see in the film The Matrix. It feels like the code was alive and it had its own embedded energy. Then at the bottom here, I got more patterns. Feel like they're beautiful, ornate, and abstract. Feel like they got an architectural and geometric interpretation to them. It almost feels like if you could visualize blockchain technology, it would be like a performance art. Then on this page, I tried to do a sketch of the actual what I could see in my head of what blockchain technology would look like if you could interpret the movement of data into geometric signals. So I had this kind of weird shape that was a bit like a kaleidoscope. Then I went to try and look at the people itself that were behind the blockchain, and surprisingly, I felt like there were more than one person. I felt like it was a small group of people that were hiding behind the name Satoshi or the pseudonym Satoshi. It felt like to me like there was 3 or 4 people. I felt at least one of them was female or very feminine in nature, and it felt like a collective effort, an expression of energy and intent, which was a long-term plan.
That's key. A long-term plan. Keep that in mind.
To change, and it was to do with power as well. It felt like a group of hacker-type people, but not destructive in their actions. They felt like they were, I think they call them maybe black hat hackers or something. They felt, the strange thing in this is I felt that there was an Asian part to this as well. So there were Caucasians there. There felt like there was an Asian influence, and it feels something like 3 males and 1 female, but I can't be exact on that. I also felt that they were remotely connected and they were very secretive. They were funded and they were very influential. The creators themselves, I felt they were very busy, very mindful, very intelligent, very resourceful. They were wealthy and they were highly tech savvy. It felt like this group met online. Feels like it's a joint effort, but feels very hidden, and it feels like it's hidden from these people in their real day jobs as well. So it almost feels like it's a sideline or a hobby.
Hidden in their real day jobs. Like if you're the head of the Federal Reserve System, and you would hide that you're creating Bitcoin on the back.
For them. Again, I repeat here that they felt wealthy, successful, tech-related. And I also had a small feeling that, and I don't know if this was the people or something else here, but there was an intel, as in, intelligence gathering kind of feeling behind this blockchain and the creators of it as well. I felt that they were very fearful, very secretive, and very careful in everything they did. I also sensed that there was something hidden within the technology, the blockchain itself. It feels like a backdoor, something very hard to find, and it felt like it was a hidden pulse or something. It was almost like a future-proof mechanism they built into the blockchain. Again, looking at the creators here on page 9, I kind of noted that they meet physically, but not very often. They're very wary, and some of them are even scared. So they more often not meet online. It's definitely a group, and it feels like they have a sense that they understand the implications of what they're doing, what they're releasing, and they understand how it's going to develop. It feels like they have this righteous aim to it. They feel like they're doing good for the world in what they do. And it feels like what we're seeing at the moment and what we're seeing develop around the world is only a single first step to something more bigger. It seems like they're behind a plan for something to evolve into something bigger than what we're seeing right now. And I feel that this bigger plan has something to do with almost like an artificial or an alive intelligence connected in or with a blockchain. Almost like a global thinking and evolving brain of consciousness distributed everywhere, but through this kind of living energy of a blockchain.
I would equate this to, a lot of people are afraid that AI is going to take over, assuming that any intelligent AI would be inherently evil. I would dispute that 100%. I would say any intelligent AI would be inherently good. The universe absolutely favors good over bad. So, yeah, in a battle between two bots, one's good and one's bad, ultimately the good is going to win.
So I think that pretty much covers it, really. It doesn't feel like a single person. It feels like a very small covert group, very secretive. I do sense that there's some kind of hidden intel element there. I don't know if it's them working for it in intelligence in some way, or if there's intelligence keeping an eye on them. I didn't really explore that. But
so basically, in summary of Daz's session, the things I got from it: group of more than a few people, but very, very secretive, just like the good guys, as I call them. Very sound morals, doing it for the good of humanity. Remember with the Road to Roota comics, when Roota talks about, or when Roota's grandmother, who was Arthur Burns, the head of the Fed, talks about the big people wanting to step on the little people. This is kind of the same thing. You got to do this stuff in secret, or they're going to take you out, as Kennedy learned the hard way.
that's pretty much it, really. Yeah, a very small group, mainly males, possibly a female, possibly someone Asian in there. I feel like they're behind this single Satoshi kind of pseudonym.
Very interesting session, Daz. Good work. That was fascinating. I think what's a couple of important points were that you got 3 to 4 people. So you have a group of people, and all the remote viewers working independently got similar data that it was a group of people. Now
that is not a surprise to anyone who's read Satoshi's emails back and forth with Gavin Andreessen when they were setting up Bitcoin. Often he talked about, well, we did this and we did that. So yeah, it was definitely a group of people.
One person, and you had 3 Caucasian men. I similarly had that. So let's look at my session right now. We're going to go to screen sharing right now. Here's my first impression working the remote viewing session for Satoshi Nakamoto, a slide rule. I felt that this goes back to a time when they were using slide rules, and it was an attempt to understand information seeded by ETs.
So, okay, Dick's session is much more kind of forthcoming with people, with things and events. If you look at the very first computer, it would be the slide rule. Absolutely. The abacus, all the way back. And was this part of the ET seeding? Probably it was. But, obviously things evolved. I don't think when the slide rule was invented by whoever, gave them the slide rule or ever invented it, I don't think they had Bitcoin in mind at that time. But that is the very beginnings of the computer, and it all depends on how far back you think you want to go to say there was a plan to implement a decentralized electronic money.
The thought that just popped into my head. Put it down. Next, I saw a place where there was a stairway going up the hillside with lush vegetation, a forested area. And this was a place where a person would have a gazebo up on a hill in a private place to meditate and just get his head right and contemplate things. The thought popped into my head that the name was an anagram, an inside joke, that if you took somebody can do this, feed Satoshi Nakamoto into an anagram machine and see what comes out.
I on that note, I would say really interesting link potentially to Stephen DeVoe, the guy, the adapter of the Federal Reserve Bank comic book, the computer programmer at the Fed Boston, because he was all into games, and that was his deal. He hid all those meanings in the Wishes and Rainbows comic book, so this would be right up his alley, if you ask me.
An interesting exercise. All right. You had 3 to 4 people. I initially saw in my work people that were connected through time and information. Information goes through different people and then expands outward.
This is absolutely true. If you go back to the early NSA documents in the 90s. And, I mean, to me, this really goes back all the way back to the road to Roota, the invention of financial computing. I never really put that together, that it could actually be a plan that spans decades, not just, a couple years. So interesting that Dick ended up with this concept.
Some of my ideograms probes for low level. People and voices. I smelled cigarette smoke. I got a town in a place where there were pine trees. It was cool. A small town and land. This looked like a nice place. Wooded hills in a small community. At the time I wrote Palo Alto, but later what starts to come into my mind is maybe somewhere even in Europe.
I think he had it right in the beginning. I think the Palo Alto spot is very, very important. And I will tell you why in just a second when he talks about his second individual.
Okay, so that's the location. Men at desks with a chalkboard, and I drew that. So I saw what looked like a classroom, a 60s lecture hall, like in a college setting.
60s lecture hall in a college setting. How does that relate to cryptos? How does that relate to the Fed? How does that relate to Road to Roota? I'll tell you in a second.
Linoleum smells, PhD level work. This man speaks and lectures and imparts complex knowledge that's theoretical in a place where there's cigarette smoke and chalkboard sound.
That is John Kemeny right there. John Kemeny. He just described John Kemeny. 1960s, here's John Kemeny teaching people how to use the basic computer programming language at Dartmouth. That's exactly what John Kemeny did. And remember, John Kemeny, best buddies with Alan Greenspan back in the early, they went to high school together. John Kemeny got a job working for Albert Einstein as his mathematician. That's how smart John Kemeny was. So Kemeny and Greenspan were both massively into computers in the 50s and 60s. Kemeny ended up taking the college route, stayed at Dartmouth pretty much his whole life, teaching people about computers. John Kemeny introduced BASIC to get computers into the hands of the people. Did they have a plan to go to an electronic monetary system back then? Not a completely thought out plan, but absolutely. The idea was to get it out of the control of these bad people who control our lives. John Kemeny did that with his basic computer programming. Before that, it was just, CIA, NSA, all the bad guys had the only computer control. Kemeny literally opened it up to the world. So that's who I think he's describing. That would be the very beginnings of Bitcoin, of the cryptocurrency revolution, started by getting computer programming into the hands of the people. That's what John Kemeny did when he invented BASIC, the basic computer programming. And there he is in front of a classroom teaching. And there's a whole bunch of other pictures of Kemeny teaching in his classroom. And he was an amazing guy. And he didn't get bought out by the banksters. A lot of people think Greenspan got, there's Kemeny with the chalkboard behind him. A lot of people think Greenspan, when he learned computers, got bought out by the banksters. There he is again. Does that describe this viewing? Absolutely.
And then I saw someone working at an old computer. This seemed to be like from the 70s or 80s. The big screens with cathode ray tubes. Very advanced for its time, but seems bulky and old now. Big round floppy drives and mainframes.
Again, for those who don't know my work, check out Alan Greenspan. Go to roadtoroota.com, look up this article, Greenspan's Golden Secret. Greenspan was a computer programmer in the 1960s. That was his job. He was absolutely the world's best financial computer programmer. If you read The Age of Turbulence, his book, he blames himself for the Y2K problem, programming 2 digits instead of 4 for the year. Absolutely. So is this Alan Greenspan working at his computer. Now, in Greenspan's office at Townsend Greenspan in Manhattan, he had his big office where he met clients, and they'd come in and they'd sit and talk around a conference table, big old office, and then there was a door, a secret door on the left. In that room, he held all the computer equipment. So nobody knew he was a computer god. Over here, a guy named Lowell Wiltbank was helping him. But that's what it would look like if you went into that room and Greenspan was hard at work at his computer.
Cigarette smoke clinging to the air here. A computer the size of a room, and the thought of a DARPA research facility popped into my mind.
But like you said, but it's not DARPA. Now this is an interesting
I saw a building that I felt had a word crypt related to it. And then I started seeing people. This is the first person that I saw in sketch.
First guy right here.
This was a guy that looked like a businessman in the 1960s from the dress of the era of Mad Men, you know, the thin tie and the suit jacket. An executive from the 60s who would put Vitalis in his hair.
You got that? Thin tie, executive from the 60s who put Vitalis in his hair, and he was a computer programmer. Remember that. He had to be one of the best computer programmers in the world. Right? There he is. Got the Vitalis in the hair and everything. Got the glasses, the thin tie, the executive from the 60s, the computer programmer. That was one of the best things I saw, and really did link in everything else. So yeah, that is a picture of Alan Greenspan. Even got the black rim glasses.
And then I saw a 70s looking guy.
Now this one, this is the one where is it my subconscious leaking in because I was one of the people who suggested this target. Because I have always had a sneaking suspicion that there was another guy involved with this whole thing, not just Bitcoin, but the whole thing controlling the monetary system, but mainly Bitcoin. So remember, if you have a monetary system, or you want to implement a monetary system in the 1950s and 60s that is free from government, and you create this computer system that you think, oh, you know, if everybody had a computer, we could do this. Well, John Kemeny writes a program so that everybody can program computers, but it didn't get the computer to the human beings. That's what needed to happen. And there's only one guy, well, there's many people, but one guy who really spearheaded putting a personal computer into your household and then putting a phone with a computer on it into your hand. There was one guy, and this is exactly what he looked like.
This would be the longish hair of the 70s, not hippie hair, but long bangs and over the ears and down the back to his collar. He had a square jaw, big collars, a 70s kind of colorful shirt, a big belt buckle. He was young looking. The thought of Lawrence Livermore came into my thought. I feel that he likes the I Ching and he smokes pot.
So keep an eye on that guy, right? 70s, computer programmer, or involved in computers. Longish hair, hippie, smokes pot, likes the I Ching. There he is. Steve Jobs. Right now you're going, what are you talking about, Big Swear? This is only Road to Roota Theory, mind you. But what did Steve Jobs do? Steve Jobs, if John Kemeny got the software into the hands of the everyday man, Alan Greenspan wrote the programs to create the financial system, Steve Jobs got the hardware into the hands of the people. The personal computer. He's the guy who brought it into the home. And he's the guy that put the iPhone in your hand that made cryptocurrencies possible. If there's anybody more responsible, let me know. And Jobs has a very unique past before he went into, started Apple Computers. All of a sudden, he goes to India, comes back, and starts Apple Computer, the most successful company on the planet. What did he do, and how did he do it? There he is. Doesn't he look like what was described? Here's a really interesting History Channel discussion of what Jobs did. He worked for Atari briefly as a consultant, and then he ran off to India. And check this out.
One of Apple's first employees, Daniel Kotke, made a decision that would change not only the course of their lives, but ultimately the course of humanity.
I met Steve at Reed College the first month, but our friendship developed because a week or two later, I must have been walking around with a copy of Be Here Now, and I was eager to talk about it. And Steve was familiar with it. That book quickly led to Autobiography of a Yogi, and then led to Ramakrishna and his disciples.
Like many of his generation, Jobs became caught up in the spiritual enlightenment movement that was sweeping through America in the 1970s. And according to those who knew him best, he considered it not just a passing interest, but a calling.
Steve got a hold of the book Cosmic Consciousness. That's probably what pushed him over the edge. He had chapters about great geniuses through history and how they were enlightened, and that was his whole thesis. That's how he ended up in India.
Fueled by his desire to find spiritual enlightenment, Steve Jobs traveled to India, with Daniel following a few months later. Together, they discovered a Hindu guru known as Haidakhan Baba. He was discovered at about the age of 18 doing yoga in a cave. But there are legends going back that the same figure had appeared all the way back into the 1800s. Haidakhan Baba claimed that he had no mother or father. But who was this character who had no known history before the age of 18 and was said to have manifested out of thin air? He professed that he was an immortal being, known in Hinduism as Mahavatar Babaji.
The Maha-Avatar means the great avatar, the great incarnated being. Maha-Avatar is eternal, and he can appear anytime, anywhere, taking forms of another human being. So he was here to change the humanity in a better path, in a path of understanding, path of greatness.
Steve Jobs did spend some time with him. Haidakhan Baba actually gave him an initiation by giving him a spiritual name. This is a traditional kind of initiation. So they were formally initiated by this guru.
Babaji had said that he was a celestial being who would come to Earth to help enlighten our planet and to advance us forward. And we have to wonder, is it possible that Stephen Jobs was being influenced telepathically by an extraterrestrial entity named Babaji?
Haidakhan Baba claimed that he had come to guide humanity to a higher path and referred to himself as the messenger of the revolution. Shortly after returning to the United States, Steve Jobs embarked on a revolution himself, the development of the microcomputer, along with Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak.
Steve was not in it for money. He was in it for the mission of transforming the world. The Apple II was the first mass market personal computer. Woz, of course, was the all-around genius who created the whole design and all the software. But the thing that Steve gets huge credit for is having enough passion for what he's...
So, interesting, right? How does it all connect together? Does it all connect together? Well, something really interesting also is the only spokesman for Apple Computer in the history of Apple Computer, besides Steve Jobs, was this guy, Alan Greenspan.
The Apple IIc and money.
People in high places are always asking me, Alan, where does the money go? If you wonder the same thing, I suggest an Apple IIc, an Apple modem. Then you can call up your bank and see how much money you have. You can even pay off your bills automatically. If you have any money left over, congratulations. You're doing better than the government is.
The Apple IIc. There's no telling how far it can take you.
That was made in 1985. 2 years later, Alan Greenspan was put as the head of the Federal Reserve System. Alan Greenspan, the world's biggest gold bug, the world's best computer programmer from the 1960s. Crazy, I know, but all the pieces fit. And one more piece I want to take a look at, this guy, Stephen DeVoe. Let's talk about who Dick Allgaier sees next.
He looks younger than he really is. He's very smart. He smells of tobacco, has a gruff, gravelly voice. He's a math whiz and has photographic memory. We're going to come back to this guy because this guy is really interesting.
And remember, at the beginning of this session, Dick talks about Palo Alto. Who's been in Palo Alto and what was born in Palo Alto? Apple Computer, Steve Jobs.
In terms of what Rock Archie got. And then I saw a newer person. This seemed generational. I felt the next generation was a guy with short hair like Kevin Costner had in The Bodyguard, a really neat, close-cropped haircut, slight build, wears sweaters with no collar. I felt
this, I believe, is Stephen DeVoe. Stephen DeVoe is this guy. If you go to the Federal Reserve Bank Wishes and Rainbows comic book, Stephen DeVoe adapted it in 1981 out of the Fed Boston. Right here, adapted by Stephen DeVoe. He worked for the Federal Reserve, obviously, right there. And then in 2007, when it was re-released, there he is right at the top. Written by Deborah Carpenter Beck, adapted by Stephen DeVoe. Okay, let's talk about who Stephen DeVoe is. Stephen DeVoe is a computer programmer and project implementation expert. I talked about him in the very first Road to Roota analysis. But here's some interesting stuff. When you look at his bio, that's him right there. Stephen DeVoe was born in Barbados, immigrated to the U.S. at age 15. After serving in U.S. military intelligence in Vietnam, he graduated from University of Massachusetts, Boston, with a BA in English and teaching certification. After a few years working on financial software training project. So let's go back. Hang on. He graduated in 1976. And then he was working on financial software training projects. So he was a computer programmer. He discovered the methodology of project management in 1987. What in the world did he do for over 10 years? He worked for the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. Nowhere in this does it say that. It does say he worked for U.S. military intelligence. Really interesting. Steve's first book, Total Project Control, in 1999, introduced readers to ROI-based project evaluation. And that's when he became famous as the world's best project manager. But nobody heard of him. Nobody knew who he was. Because he worked secretly for the Fed, programming computers. And he's also a guy who loves the games. He loves big into game theory, and he just dives into that crap. So when they talk about Satoshi Nakamoto being an anagram, this is the guy who would be excited about putting something like that in there. And I'd have a lot more on Stephen DeVoe and who he is. So just check out Road to Roota, do a search on Stephen DeVoe, and I think that's the guy potentially that Dick Allgaier is talking right here.
He was Jewish, maybe a dual citizen of Israel. He didn't have cigarette smoke smell on him, smelled clean like soap. He has poor social skills, but very smart. And I felt his father was someone famous in science. So that is my work. Overlapping with Daz, this shows a group of people, multiple people involved, 3 Caucasian. And now we're joined by Rock Archie, another remote viewer in Pittsburgh.
So that was Dick's. It all lines up to the Road to Roota theory, and that's where it gets to. Is there some kind of contamination that has gone on from the Road to Roota theory into that. But I didn't have, in the Road to Ruta theory, I didn't spread it out over decades. I thought it was just Greenspan and a couple people at the NSA. And this is clearly saying, no, it goes back to John Kemeny creating the first shareable computer software, to Alan Greenspan creating the first financial computer software, to to Jobs creating the first hardware in your home and then on your cell phone, and it's all a group. And then I do think it gets into the other guys, all the guys that contributed, even this guy, Gavin Andreessen, who was the main programmer for Bitcoin after Satoshi released his white paper. He mined the first Bitcoin. Gavin Andreessen was working with Satoshi for a year or a year and a half before the CIA called him in and said, hey, let's talk about this. That's the last email that Gavin got from Satoshi. So really interesting stuff. Does it prove anything conclusively? No, but it gets us a whole lot closer in my mind. And it's like the original Road to Ruta stuff. You had to put together the pieces over time, and it all kind of fit together. And now, I mean, obviously, Greenspan, I have proven it time and time again that he was in control of rigging markets to keep this system alive. But now I think he is deeply involved, absolutely, in the Satoshi Nakamoto group and effort over the last 60 years to break humanity away from these criminal banksters and to offer up a new solution. So there you go. That's my take as of this moment. Dick Allgaier and the guys are sending me over all the raw data. Maybe there's something in that raw data that they kind of glossed over because they didn't think it was important, but I might think it's important because it relates to the Road to Ruta. I do not know, but really cool stuff. And make sure you guys sign up for the Crypto Viewing Patreon. Go to patreon.com and look up Crypto Viewing. Sign up for a monthly thing where you send them like 10 or 20 bucks and you get access to all this crypto viewing they're going to be doing. Mostly it's going to be coins, but we're also going to do the Grand Canyon and some fun stuff. So make sure you check that out. And and if you guys have any thoughts or information or other data you can send to me, send it at Bix at Road to Ruta, and we'll get to the bottom of who Satoshi is, who the group is, and where it will bring us, because I think it's so important. If it really is this long string of very connected people, then absolutely the future is all about cryptos, and the amount of cash that's going to have to flow out of the old system into the new system is hundreds of trillions, if not quadrillions of dollars. So no, we are not in a bubble in the cryptos at all. And anybody who says that doesn't understand what's going on. It's Bix Weir. I'll talk to you guys later.